Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911, Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host, and we are back with another innovator interview talking with Dr. Oliver Peoples, who's the CEO of Yield10 Bioscience. Now, let's set the stage for this conversation. Plastic is the most challenging modern material. It's ubiquitous. We depend on it for a variety of things, but it's also a major source of pollution, particularly in our oceans. Only about 8% of the 8.3 billion tons of plastic produced around the world annually are recycled. And by 2050, the world is expected to need more than 34 billion tons of plastic a year. But we cannot afford the environmental damage associated with petroleum-based plastics. And one of the answers may be bioplastics, which are made from plant material and organic waste. There's a variety of ways to make bioplastic. And they can change our future, reducing the need to extract oil from the ground and making the resulting waste from our consumer products and packaging more environmentally friendly, because bioplastic can break down without leaving harmful forever chemicals in the ground or water. Now, Yield10 Bioscience recently announced a successful field trial to grow oilseeds that can be used to produce biodegradable PHA plastic. I won't try to say the name PHA, the chemical name, because I can't pronounce it. But these bioplastics can help reduce or actually replace petroleum-based plastics. They're working to improve the production of Camelina seeds. You might also know that as flax, that produce PHA oils and can be harvested economically to make these alternatives to regular petroleum-based plastics. Welcome, Oliver. How are you today?
I'm good, Mitch, and really appreciate being with you here today on Earth Day.
Well, it's a great day to be talking about what we can do to solve the plastic problem, because it is a problem. First, can you just explain what a PHA bioplastic is and how it would perform traditional plastic compared to a traditional plastic? Like, is it suitable for both rigid and flexible applications? Where would we expect to see its use?
Yeah, so first of all, I'll tell you what they are. So they're natural materials like silk or wool, which were and cellulose for that matter, which we're all very familiar with, and all natural materials are fully biodegradable in the environment. What's unique about the PHA bioplastic is they're actually produced in microorganisms, so they're widely prevalent in the natural ecosystem and in the environment anyway. But they're polyesters. They're high molecular weight polyesters. And because they're polyester polymers, you can process them using existing plastics equipment. And so, we use the name PHA bioplastics because it's a family of materials.
Okay.
And the beauty of a family of materials is you can change the properties. So you've got things like, low density polyethylene, linear low density, high density. You get different properties with these types of things. And you can do something very similar with PHAs. And they've been around, for quite some while. So they're very flexible. You can make flexible packaging. You can make thermoformed items. You can make rigid materials with them.
So even as something as common as film to cover for food storage?
Yes, I mean films is an area where there's a lot of activity in PHAs. I mean, we're working in Camelina, but people are working in a wide range of different production technologies. And so I think, yes, you can use them in all kinds of plastics applications. They're not a panacea for everything, but certainly they can be applied to a lot of single-use packaging, food service, et cetera, in those areas.
Okay, so let's talk about how it performs once it's been used. How does PHA bioplastic break down in the environment?
Yeah, so it depends where you put it. So if it leaks out into the environment, really just through human behavior or misbehavior, then it will actually naturally biodegrade over time. It depends on the product form. If it's a thick, rigid material, say it's a bottle cap, that will take longer to biodegrade in the environment than, for example, a film.
Sure.
That's just related to the way these things degrade. So just because microorganisms produce these materials, microorganisms also have all the machinery to break them down naturally in the environment. And that doesn't matter whether it's in soil, whether it's in cold compost, hot compost, your backyard, or if it was to end up in a river, stream, or the ocean, it will biodegrade.
So would it be best to get it into an industrial composting environment where the temperatures are higher and it goes faster? Or is it really the case that you could put this in your compost pile in the backyard.
Well, I think it's really the case that you could put this in your compost pile in the backyard. I mean, that's something that in the earlier technology we developed for producing this using, engineered microorganisms, we did all those types of testing, and it pretty much qualifies for all the scenarios. But I think ultimately what you want these things to be collected. You don't want them escaping the environment. You want everything to be collected. And, my own personal preference would be to see, this PHA is used, particularly in combination with food service, ending up in biogas production for energy recovery. I think that would be a great end of life for these types of materials. So,
okay, so you could literally convert the bioplastic into a biofuel and then burn it.
Exactly, you can make natural gas with it, essentially.
Okay, now, but could it also be recycled and reused?
It can be, and then I think it for certainly can be recycled and reused. And I think it's interesting because it's a natural product. It has some very unique recycling options, and this one is going to sound like science fiction, but it actually works. So PHAs are actually part of the natural carbon nitrogen cycle in water and in wastewater treatment. And so basically, in water systems, the PHA, whether it's PHA pellets or PHA plastic items, will slowly biodegrade. And the microbes in the water will actually use that energy to convert nitrate to nitrogen gas and essentially remove nitrate pollution. So there's some really interesting opportunities, which are kind of sound out of the box, but actually will work pretty well to use waste plastic as a water treatment chemical.
That's fascinating. So what you're saying is, and again, you have to pick your targets and do this the right way, but you could literally engineer the cleanup of the environment using waste?
Yes. And we're certainly not sure. One of the things we're not short of in this country is polluted waterways with nitrate and phosphate runoff from agriculture and human activity.
That's fascinating. Now, what are the economic barriers to bringing this to market? Because, oil has become cheaper over the past 10 years because we're using less of it. Does that end up being a competitor to economically viable PHA bioplastic?
Yeah, so I think it depends a little bit on who you ask. If you look at what's really happening, you'll see many of the big food companies, Nestle, Pepsi, Unilever, a very large number of them, consumer products companies, and in other words, basically beginning to move away from the traditional plastic industry. Now, let's be very careful how we phrase that. What they would like to move away from it, or they would like to move to the use of less petroleum plastics. The problem is the availability of alternatives that meet their needs in terms of the performance, are also at a cost point. So, in our earlier business, using the fermentation technology, we produced a PHA bioplastic. In fact, there's a little company called Danimer Scientific, it's not so little now, down in Georgia, also using the fermentation technology to produce PHAs. And they have relationships with folks like, Mars and Pepsi and others. And obviously, it's a much higher price point than the industry's used to, but they seem to be getting a lot of traction. What's different about Yield10 is if you look at producing something, any natural product, by far the lowest cost, most scalable way to do that is agriculture, directly producing these things in crops. And that's what we actually announced on that press release, a successful field test of producing, PHA bioplastic in the Camelina seed as a third product. And so that's a really exciting development. Still a long ways to go, but obviously what that does is it marries up the low cost and scale of agriculture with this enormous plastics market for the first time. So it's the first step on a journey that we hopefully will lead to, large opportunity for PHA bioplastics.
Well, let's talk a little about the growing Camelina or flax. Does it replace other crops profitably, or is it a rotation crop that you use to restore the soil between growing various food crops?
In reality, it's both. So if one of the things to look at when you look at a crop like Camelina, you've got to look at where they grow, the food oil crop canola, primarily in the Pacific Northwest Canada, and some parts of South America as well. But basically, it's a very suitable rotation crop with those crops, and to as part of, I would say, the rotation to manage and mitigate, disease pressure on canola, there's a need for alternative crops for the growers, which also, of course, generate revenue for growers. And so that's obviously one opportunity. The second opportunity is to double crop, using it as a winter cover or relay crop, where you're actually using it to reduce nutrient runoff, as well as improve soil carbon. And at the same time, the value add from the seed processing makes that a very attractive proposition for the farmer.
So this is an interesting issue, because of course, if we need to grow a whole lot of camelina, we are also facing a decline in our topsoil. Is this a no-till compatible crop that can also help restore the biomass in the soil?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things we're working on is obviously herbicide tolerance, which is enabling for no-till. Mm-hmm. And we're basically, we're still relatively early, but what we're using there is we're just essentially replicating what's been done in other crops, because we know it works, and because we know that the regulatory authorities have previously approved this, and there has been some very favorable regulatory developments both in the US and Canada with known traits. All we're doing is deploying it in Camelina for the first time.
Okay. Now, your product is bioengineered, and that is a concern to some people. Can you explain why using CRISPR gene editing technology on a crop isn't going to create a mutation in the wild that would destroy other crops?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So ours is bioengineered, and we use a combination of both the traditional genetic engineering as well as genome editing. In the genome editing case, at least in the US and Canada and most of the South American countries, that's considered to just be an alternative crop breeding tool. In fact, it's actually probably less likely to cause a negative effect than, for example, traditional breeding using, mutagenesis technologies, which is what's been practiced for the last 100 years. And so it's a very precise targeted process. And I think if what we're seeing in Canada, for example, is that, and the Canadians are actually doing this right. They're actually going to regulate based on the crop that you've made and what it is versus how you made it, which is actually the right way to address any kind of safety issue versus a demonized technology, which, by the way, is also the basis of all the vaccines that we're getting and queuing up for the COVID pandemic.
Well, that's interesting. So let me drill into what you said. They regulate it based on what the crop is. So what you're saying is that they look at the end result of the process and judge whether or not that mutation, which is a managed mutation, is going to be harmful or positive for the environment?
Correct. And I think in 99% of, that's probably way more than that, but, basically there's just no evidence that you're going to end up with something that is, negative or could spread. And one of the challenges, I think, is that this technology is really evolved fairly quickly. But when you look at the sort of the precision with which it can be executed, and that precision is improving, steadily as new tools become available, it's going to be a very important technology going forward.
So the other economic question is, what else can you use Camelina for? Because, of course, in order for this to be robustly grown, there needs to be a lot of demand for it. You mentioned that the plastic can be reused as fuel. Could the PHA and Camelina oil be used to make a fuel, for example?
Yes. So, for example, the way we've got sort of our vision for this is very simple. We will basically produce a seed that contains 3 components instead of 2. The third component that we're adding in through bioengineering is the PHA bioplastic, but it will also contain oil, and that oil can be used in both nutrition, but also for renewable diesel or for low carbon index biofuels. Mm-hmm. And then you still get all the protein that value you get from the crop, which of course goes into animal feed. So it's really a 3-product crop. Essentially, the added value from the PHA incents the grower to adopt this in a large acreage. But the oil and the meal go into markets that are also very attractive.
So after the oil and the PHA is extracted, you're left with a protein meal that is used as a food source for animals.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. So you're solving a lot of problems with one crop.
It's kind of it's an interesting thing. It's almost like I hate to say perfect storm, but there aren't too many natural materials with plastics properties you could actually do this with. In fact, it's the only one. And so it's a very unique convergence of, new science, a material that the industry has seen before and understands has both good plastics functionality, but is fully degradable in the environment. And I would say, and then of course, the whole growing challenge around climate change, reducing greenhouse gases from agriculture, restoring soil root carbon. I mean, it's a pretty unique set of circumstances.
So let me ask about CO2 emissions. Does making PHA bioplastic from the seeds require a lot of energy, and does it contribute to climate change?
Actually, it's compared to something like polyethylene or polystyrene, it's a net negative CO2.
Okay.
Because what we're really doing is using the plant to take CO2 out of the air and make plastic instead of taking oil out of the ground and making plastic. It's a very different thing.
Oh, okay. So we're mining the sky using the plant.
We're literally using the waste CO2 that humanity is producing.
Okay, fascinating. Now, do you have an estimate of how much CO2 could be eliminated by switching from traditional plastic to PHAs and other?
Yeah, so I think I'd hate to give you the wrong number, but it's around, per kilogram, it's around, I think it's 3 kilograms. It's probably more than that, but I think it's basically a multiple of it's a negative. If something like polystyrene or something has a number of 3,000 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of material produced, this has a negative number.
Okay, now this all sounds great. You are in the midst of trials. The announcement that you shared earlier this year was that you are currently producing 6% of the crop is PHA, and you described your viable range as between 5 and 20%. So a lot of room for improvement, but you're within the economically viable range already. When do you expect this will be a viable crop that can be converted into bioplastic profitably?
Yeah, so part of the reason that it's economic, we believe it's getting within the range of economic viability, is because there's really different applications for these materials, and they each have a different, I would say, technology challenge associated with recovering the material. So, we've got to extract the pH out of the seed, as well as the oil and the protein. And so for one application, which is as a feed additive, and that's again something that's been known for a long time, basically you don't actually have to separate the PHA plastic from this seems really weird, but you don't actually have to separate the PHA plastic from the protein meal. In fact, it adds value in the meal because it has interesting impacts on feed conversion efficiency in animal feed. The second area is really for water treatment, essentially just recovering PHA just to use it as a denitrification platform for water treatment. And again, for certain markets, particularly septic systems, wastewater treatment plants, and things like closed loop aquaculture, which is a growing industry. It's a very attractive product just for removing nitrate because it produces zero waste. And then, of course, the higher hurdle is obviously product processing into plastics, because as you mentioned early on, plastics are hugely important for the quality and lifestyle that we have. And sometimes I think the public assumes that just because they're low cost, they're low technology, they're actually incredibly sophisticated. And obviously there's, probably 80 years of development gone into that. And so they're very sophisticated, high-tech materials. And obviously you need high quality product to go into that. So we see sort of bringing these products out in sequence.
So as our listeners are interested in when this will be something that they can use themselves, what should they be watching as your next major milestones?
So we've been pretty open about the fact we've still got a few years to go on this. It literally was a breakthrough. There was, hate to say this, but it was literally 30 years in the making to kind of get to the point where we now know how to really do this, and we have the tools available to do this and boost the numbers, to the targets that we have in mind. So, this was a fairly recent and fairly dramatic outcome, a little unexpected, to be honest. And so, now we're basically starting to scale up so we can begin to look at processing and these types of things, even as we work in parallel to increase the level of PHA bioplastic in the seed from 6% to 10 to 50 to 20. And we have good precedent for increasing it using other approaches, which were really not suitable for the field, but we know we can get up to 20%.
So this is another one of those complex stories. It's going to take 30 years to produce an overnight success. And everybody will think it just happened when you do it, but you really have been working on it for a long time.
Yeah, I would say we have, I'll be honest, we've been caught a little short in that right now there's just phenomenal public and investor interest in PHA bioplastics. And all you have to do is look at the Danimer success with its public offering through a SPAC, and you'll realize there's massive interest in this. So of course, when people reach out to us because of our long history in PHA bioplastics, and quite frankly, they're a little shocked when we tell them about the Camelina technology, because it's literally been being developed in sort of in stealth mode over the last few years. So yeah, we do find it's literally, yes, it's one of these things which people go, wow, and then they think it happened overnight. It didn't happen overnight.
So do you see any of the green investment initiatives, particularly the U.S. and Canadian federal governments, support for CO2 reduction in the transition to biofuels and bioplastic as
we've seen that a lot.
Accelerating this?
Yeah, right now we're seeing a lot of that particularly in terms of low carbon diesel fuel. In California, there's regulations in place. And of course, that's creating additional demand for vegetable oil. So Camelina oil will fit really nicely into that. And that's all driven by the lower carbon index versus greenhouse gas savings versus using petroleum diesel. We are seeing the electrification of the automobile, and that's likely to become the dominant thing. But for large trucks that move most of our goods, you're going to need essentially renewable diesel for those applications. The Canadians recently enacted similar legislation. The Europeans have it in place. And then I think, we're hearing, again, it's just very fresh off the press, but yesterday Biden's announcing, we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030. Now, I have to be honest, I'm pretty skeptical on that. But I think the key about setting, such a goal is it will result in, I would say, the right type of pressure on both industry, but also in innovators to strive to meet those goals. And that's really going to be very positive thing for Yield10 Bioscience.
So how can folks keep up on your story? Where should they be watching?
Yeah, you can go to our website. It's Yield10 Bio, Yield10bio.com. And we will continue. We're just actually in the process of refreshing our website to include the whole PHA story. But you'll be able to follow the news flow. And then, of course, we're on Twitter and we're on Facebook as well.
Well, Oliver, I want to thank you for taking time to talk to us today. And I wish you the greatest luck in making this transition.
Well, really appreciate it, Mitch. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you. Folks, that was Dr. Oliver Peoples, who is CEO of Yield10 Bioscience, a Woburn, Massachusetts-based company. Check him out at yield10bio.com, as he shared. This is Earth911, Sustainability in Your Ear. We're going to be back with another innovator interview soon. But in the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet. We'll be back soon.